Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the History Cloak channel. After a really long delay, do you remember when I said, oh yeah, we're going to start the Stalin foreign policy episode in a week and a half, 2 weeks, and it's going to be awesome? Well, let's just say that home renovations take a lot longer and there's a lot more delays than some people make it seem. Not to mention the fact that I also had bronchitis and therefore laryngitis and I couldn't speak and blah 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 blah. Welcome to 2023, it's January, and I'm finally able to actually start the Stalin foreign policy episode. I'm hoping in the future that there will not be this many long delays, so I apologize, and I hope that I'm able to produce more content more consistently, even with my full-time job and all the rest of it. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's get started. So let's start out by saying that the National Socialists, the Nazis of Germany, did not like the Communists of the Soviet Union, and the Communists of the Soviet Union did not like the National Socialists of Germany. They both claimed that the other group was a detriment and evil and completely misaligned with their goals. Well, the hilarious part is, both groups are pretty much the same. Their main difference is in who they claim to help. So the National Socialists claimed that they were there to build up Germany, to build up the country and its infrastructure, and that together, the country would rise and gain prominence. Whereas the Communists of the Soviet Union, their argument was they were there for the working class and to oppose the rich, the bourgeoisie, if you remember that term. Now, if you think about it, both groups did the same thing, though. They established a dictator. They had complete control of the country with a huge central government. No freedom of speech, no freedom of the press, no freedom of religion, the works. But yet they opposed each other because they claimed to be helping two different groups. Now, despite these differences, Germany and the Soviet Union signed a non-aggression pact in 1939 on the eve of World War II. Basically, the pact said Germany would not invade the Soviet Union, and in turn, the Soviet Union would not invade Germany. So basically, the Soviet Union lets Germany do whatever it wants in Europe, and the Soviet Union will kind of take over control of Eastern Europe, and the Germans won't do anything to the Soviets. So, Stalin, at the beginning of World War II, has aligned himself with Adolf Hitler. Now, with the pact in place and Germany wreaking havoc through Europe, Stalin decided to annex or take over parts of Poland and Romania, as well as taking over the entirety of the Baltic states of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. He also invaded Finland as well. Now, that didn't exactly go over well, invading Finland. If you have the chance, look up a Finnish sniper whose nickname was the White Death. Yeah, let's just say that invading Finland was a mistake. But Stalin did get concessions from Finland, even though he wasn't able to take them over. Now, things were going well with this non-aggression pact and probably would have remained well throughout all of World War II had not Germany decided to do one stupid thing: invade Russia in June of 1941. Now, ladies and gentlemen, there are a few foreign policy rules that you should always remember. Number 1, never fight a land war in Asia. Number 2, never go in against a Sicilian when death is on the line. And number 3, do not fight in Russia when it is winter. Leave and then come back in spring, but do not stay through winter. It does not go well. Now, you may be asking yourself at this point, Adolf Hitler's Nazi Germany versus Joseph Stalin's Communist Soviet Union. Which should I root for in this war? Would it be better for Europe and the world if Nazi Germany won? Or would it be better for Europe and the world if the Communist Soviet Union won? Well, the answer is honestly, I don't know. You've got two really evil dictators with really bad political philosophies / economic philosophies going at it. It's kind of like saying, hey, Here's a group of racist people who are white versus a group of racist people who are black. Who should I root for? Neither. Hopefully both lose and both destroy themselves in the process is what you want. There really is no good guy in this. So we're just going to go through, explain what happened, but there really isn't a side to root for in this case. Initially, Germany's invasion of the Soviet Union went well. Stalin had ignored American intel, British intel, and his own Soviet intel, telling him the Germans are planning on invading the Soviet Union. Now, because he ignored it, the Soviet Union was taken completely by surprise, and so the Germans were able to gain a lot of territory as they made their push towards Moscow. Now, here is the key turning point in Germany's invasion. The German army tried to take Stalingrad. As they're pushing towards Moscow, Hitler wanted them to take Stalingrad. Stalingrad was a huge industrial city and very important to the Soviet Union, and also, it has the name Stalingrad. That makes very good propaganda if you can take over the city of Stalingrad. Well, the Soviets decide, no, you are not taking Stalingrad. The Germans decide, hey, we are taking Stalingrad, and this is where the line in the sand is drawn, is at Stalingrad. If the Russians cannot defeat the Germans at Stalingrad, the Germans are going to take Moscow, and then who knows what happens from there. So, here's what happened. The Battle of Stalingrad raged from August 1942 through February 1943. You had 2 million troops fighting in close quarters combat. You also had 2 million casualties. So in other words, 2 million people either killed or injured. This would be counting civilians as well. This was one of the most brutal battles of World War II. Because Stalin knew that the Germans were going to invade Stalingrad, he had most of Stalingrad's grain and cattle shipped out. That way the Germans couldn't capture supplies that Moscow needed. But Stalin left the 400,000 civilians of Stalingrad. He left them there. He did not evacuate them because he felt that having the civilians there would inspire the Russian troops. Remember, dictators are not known for caring about people, only caring about outcomes. If civilians get killed, then hey, que sera, sera. It is estimated that around 10,000 civilians were killed, and it's also estimated that around another 10,000 were captured by the German soldiers and sent to labor camps. To give you an idea of the Battle of Stalingrad, you need to remember the Luftwaffe, which is the German Air Force, they had complete control of the skies over Stalingrad, and they basically bombed Stalingrad into oblivion. Not to mention, you couldn't get ships up the Volga River because, again, the Luftwaffe would just sink those ships. The Russian troops were suffering heavy casualties trying to slow the German troops down. Now, they were able to slow the German troops down. They were able to stop the German troops from just taking over Stalingrad easily, but at the cost of heavy casualties. It was desperate to the point that the Russian government had civilians in Stalingrad who weren't a part of the war effort. They had them fighting even though they might not have their own firearms. They were still on the front lines trying to fight. They had women in Stalingrad digging trenches. Stalin issued his very famous not one step back order, which meant if you went out to fight the Germans and you retreated, you would be shot retreating back to safety. So it was either go out and defeat the Germans and get killed possibly, or if you come back, we'll kill you. Again, dictators are not exactly known for their care of the civilian population. You also had German snipers fighting against Russian snipers roof to roof throughout Stalingrad. This was just a massive, brutal battle. Now, luckily for Russian troops, not only were they able to slow German troops down going into Stalingrad so that the German army could not just take over Stalingrad easily. That's why you had fighting building to building and street to street. But the Russian troops were able to win battles around Stalingrad. Battles against Italian troops, that had joined in with the Germans. Remember the Axis powers, Italy, Germany, and Japan. So they're able to defeat Italian troops and also other German troops around Stalingrad. So what does that mean? That means that the Russian troops were slowly building a circle around Stalingrad with the German troops inside. Now, combine that with one other advantage, and the Russian troops are able to win. Now that advantage is called winter. Winters in Russia are very, very harsh. But if you're Russian, you are used to these winters. If you are German, you are not used to these winters. The Russian generals pretty much said, all right, we're just going to cut off supplies to the German troops and also give them no way to escape. And let's see if they can survive this winter. Well, the German troops could not, and in the end, the German troops had to surrender. Around 100,000 German troops were captured. Most of them would die of disease and starvation in Russian camps. But those German troops were captured. Stalin had to admit failure in trying to invade Russia. And Stalin, at this point, then decides, hey, you know what? I love the Allies. I think the Allies, America, Britain, they're amazing. I'll join them. And this does turn the tide of World War II, because now you have the Russians attacking from the Eastern Front, and now you have the Americans and British attacking from the Western Front. This puts Germany at a disadvantage now. Joseph Stalin would join President Franklin Delano Roosevelt of the United States and Prime Minister Winston Churchill of Britain in the Tehran Conference. Tehran is the capital of Iran. He would join them at the Tehran Conference in 1943 and the very famous Yalta Conference in Crimea in 1945. Each conference was focused on what is each country going to do in this phase of World War II. The Yalta Conference was especially important because with Germany looking like it's going to lose, they had to decide, how are we going to divide Germany? How are we going to divide the capital of Berlin? You also had the creation of the United Nations with Roosevelt and Winston Churchill, and Stalin, being a major ally, gets a seat in the United Nations and on the Security Council. They decide that the United States, Great Britain, and the Soviet Union will be permanent members of the Security Council, and each of those countries will have veto power over any decision the United Nations tries to make. That is why today Russia has veto power over any decision the United Nations tries to make, and Russia is on the Security Council today. Winston Churchill never truly trusted Stalin and his motives, which, by the way, was wise, whereas FDR was far more trusting of Stalin and believing that now Stalin would be an ally with them. Which, again, if you know anything about philosophies and motivations, you should know that, hey, if you've got communism as your philosophy, chances of you being an ally with someone who is democratic and capitalist, it's not going to happen. But at this point in time with World War II, these are desperate times, so even though Churchill doesn't trust Stalin, hey, he goes along with it because you need that ally on the Eastern Front. Now, unfortunately for Eastern Europe, the Soviets marching through and liberating Eastern Europe means Stalin is now taking over Eastern Europe. He may be liberating the countries of Eastern Europe from Nazi Germany, but those countries are just trading one dictator, Adolf Hitler, for another dictator, Joseph Stalin. Now, if you know your history, you know that the Soviet army pushed closer and closer to Berlin, and that by January of 1945, they were pretty much on the outskirts of Berlin. Adolf Hitler, on April 30th, 1945, committed suicide so that he wouldn't be captured by the Soviet soldiers, and the Soviets occupied Berlin. By May 7th, 1945, Germany unconditionally surrendered to the Allies. Now, you are probably asking yourself, hey, I wonder, now that World War II is over, Stalin has allied himself with the Allies, they've defeated Hitler, surely Stalin has mellowed, become a nicer guy, maybe learned from the error of his ways? No. Unfortunately, Stalin continued his reign of purges and murders and people being thrown into the Soviet gulag, Stalin pushed for and eventually developed an atomic bomb in 1949. That way the Soviet Union could be on par with the United States. So basically he could threaten other countries to get them to do what he wanted because, hey, he always had the nuclear threat as an option. He gave permission in 1950 to Kim Il-sung to invade South Korea. That caused the Korean War. And generally, he just wasn't a good guy. He remained the evil dictator that he always was. Overall, Stalin is estimated to have been responsible for over 20 million murders, whether that be the purges and executions, or just death in the prison camps, or the forced starvation of millions of people in Ukraine. To give you perspective, Hitler was responsible for an estimated 10 million murders. Stalin doubled Hitler. He is responsible for an estimated 20 million. Just to give you a little bit of perspective and balance. So, Stalin remained the evil guy that he was at the beginning. World War II actually increased the strength of the Soviet Union as an international player. So, it didn't mellow him, it actually gave him more power on the international stage. Now, Stalin's reign does eventually come to an end, as the reign of all human beings do. So, on March 5th, 1953, at the age of 74, Stalin suffered a stroke and died from that stroke. His body remained in Lenin's mausoleum until 1961, when it was taken out of the mausoleum and buried near the Kremlin walls. Basically, the reason for taking his body out of Lenin's mausoleum and burying it in the ground was to de-Stalinize the Soviet Union. This was done by the next leader of the Soviet Union, Nikita Khrushchev. But that is going to be for the next episode. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for watching this video. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them respectfully and politely in the description box below. My name is Mr. McGee. Take care.